Hey guys, this is Nat from TechWorld, and the materials that you will need are zip ties, Velcro cable ties, and a Phillips head screwdriver. To get started, open up your side panel for your case by unscrewing the two screws that will be on the side. Now simply pull it off and it'll come right off. Inside of your computer, you can see the exposed components. You'll see the CPU cooler, the graphics card, the motherboard, the RAM, the case fans. You may see the hard drive. In our case, you do not. You will see the SSD bays, and you will also see the small holes that have been cut out in the case that can be used for cable management, which is what we are going to use today. So in this particular case that we are using, the NZXT S340, not the Elite version, there's not many cable management holes that I was talking about earlier, or just plain options, but one big thing that they've included in their case is this blue bar that you can hide cables behind. So be creative when you're looking for ways to route cables. You can hide things in the few holes that are in your case, or you can zip tie things like onto your case so it like stays one way that you want to keep it. And yeah, so it's always good to get to know the cables that you are working with. So your graphics card power will be a 4-pin most of the time. It'll be a 4-pin cable. You'll have your SATA cable for your hard drives and SSDs. You'll have a CPU fan cable for the fan, for your CPU, of course. And there will also be a USB 3 cable, which most modern PCs now have. And yeah, so to get started, you're going to want to remove all of the zip ties that are currently keeping your cables together. So you'll see in the video here that I'm just gonna cut off all the zip ties, and of course if you need help, some zip ties are put on really well and they're hard to get off. Get an adult or whoever that can help you get these off. So all of your cables will slowly start coming loose, and you can start kind of brainstorming in your head how you want to put all the cables, how you want to route it. And like on things like the 4-pin graphics card power, what you can do is you don't have to use the very first one that comes on the cable, because there's multiple cable like plugs on the cable, so you can use the second one instead, like I do later in the video, which I will mention again. So here we go. Try to bunch up those cables, start planning for how you want to do this. So in my case, I wanted it to look kind of clean. So I was planning out that I wanted to make it go straight down and then to the right into that little hole down there, and I would just bunch everything in down there where the arrow was pointing to, because there's a little hole down there, and you can see I just bunch it right into there. And then in my head I was thinking, I think this bottom part there should kind of stay at the bottom of the case, because whenever you let go, it just kind of moves up a little bit. So later in the video, you'll see me, I get a zip tie, and I go ahead and zip tie it down there, which makes it look just a lot cleaner in the end. So I was trying different ways. At first I was thinking of putting it behind this blue bar, but as you'll see here, it turns out that the cable is just not quite long enough to reach to the graphics card to provide power to it. Here we go. And I was trying to get as much of the cable as I could to the other side of the blue bar. And I really like the idea of wrapping the cable around the blue bar. I feel like it gives it a nice aesthetic, but in the end, of course, we couldn't get that to reach. I was trying my hardest, but there's just no cable left for that. So I had to think of another way to do it, because there's a lot of cable that we had to get in there. So I ended up stuffing a lot of it into that little hole under there. Like those cable management holes that I was talking about. There's one right down there that ended up I ended up sticking most of the cable into it, and then I used the second like plug on it right there, and I plug it in, and that gives me a lot less cable to deal with, as you can see here. So I'm holding that part that I want to bunch up with a Velcro cable tie, and I'm just thinking, you know, I want this to go straight down and to the right. So in my mind, I'm formulating this plan, as you should pretty much be doing this whole time, just formulating a plan. And I was trying to put it into action now, so get your Velcro cable ties, which are like really helpful because you can untie them. As you can see, I was kind of going for like a clean look in this computer, which most people I think will be going for. So it's always good to just bunch up like a lot of cables together, because it'll keep them all together in one piece. Which means you'll have less cables that look like they're, you know, going around everywhere. So I tried, there's a little hole down there, I tried putting that 4-pin power under there. But as you can see, there just wasn't enough room to get it in there, so I ended up squeezing as much of the cable I could into that, you know, hole that I was showing you before, and I plug it in. And we had this excess cable, and as you can see here, I wanted it to look kind of like that, where the cable comes down and then it just goes right. It turns right at the bottom of the case. So I was like, how can I do that? There is a little hole down there, which I can definitely try to use. And then I kind of look at the other cables, because it's always good to get your mind off of one part of the build for a second. So I start looking at the CPU power cable. And when I originally built my computer here, I had to use an extension cord for this because my power cable wasn't long enough. Like the power supply is in the bottom of the case, and I have a non-modular power supply, so we had to get an extension cord. And I was thinking, how can we make this look clean and hide most of the cable? And I utilized the blue metal bar in the end. So I unplugged the extension. I kind of figure out, how do I want this to go? I plugged the extension in to the port area without plugging the extension, like plugging the real cable into the extension. And I was just messing around with the CPU fan cable just to make sure it didn't get in the way of the fan. And from here, I was trying to make, as you can see in this build, I try to make like the cables just straight, nice and clean. So I got the CPU power, and we plug it right into that extension cord there. I end up actually moving it to the other side there to hide most of the cable. So just move it to the right. And these are like the simple things that you can do to like improve the cable management in your build. Just hide some of the cables that aren't being used, or that are being used but they are like able to be hidden behind things. And while the S340 case that I'm using here doesn't have many cable management options, this blue bar is one of the few that really helped us out. So yeah, be sure to use everything to your advantage. Use places like those to hide your cables. So I got that plugged in, all nice and tidy, and it looks pretty clean. You don't see a lot of the cable like you did before, and I then proceeded to unplugging the 24-pin power. I believe that is what it is. And I gave up on that for a second, so I turned to the USB 3 cable. So I got that out of the little mess it was in, and again, I just brainstorm ways that I can kind of cable manage and get the cable right to where it has to be, showing as little of the cable as possible. So I end up kind of wrapping it around the bar, which I think gave it a very nice look in the end. Looks really cool. It's kind of like a black stripe. So you'll see me just going different things to get my mind off of, you know, if you can't figure out how to do one thing, try to go to another thing, do that, and then come back to it, and maybe you'll figure out a way to do what you want to do. So I then go to the 24-pin power, and I eventually pull it out. It took quite a while, but I did get it out because it was in quite well. I then proceed back to the USB 3 cable and wrap it around that blue bar, as it gave it a nice aesthetic and it hid the cable. I go back to the 24-pin power, finally get it out, and I go back to the USB 3. I'm trying to unplug a lot of these cables just so I can figure out what cables I have to deal with. I found a nice way to route the SATA cable just straight and then behind the black bar, or the blue bar, sorry. So at this point, I've got the SATA cable mostly sorted out. It isn't too big of a deal because it's black and it's very close to the port on the motherboard. So I just had a straight cable going right from behind the blue bar into the motherboard SATA slot. So we're back to the USB 3 cable, wondering what to do. And I end up just deciding to wrap it, as I was showing you before. I was thinking, like, is there any other way to do it besides just wrapping it around that bar? But that was the only way I could really think of doing it. So I did end up routing it behind that. At first, when I was trying to plug in the cable, I didn't have enough slack, as you can see. I was just trying to get it to reach, but it would not reach. And so I just pulled on the cable a little more and got some of the slack to reveal, and there actually was quite a bit. So with the help of my dad, I was able to get that cable plugged in. And yeah. I really like the end result of how I got that cable done. Never be afraid to ask help. Ask for help if you need it. So we did get that cable in, and we are almost done with the cable part of things. The main thing left was tying that 4-pin power for the graphics card down to the bottom of the case, and the 24-pin power that just goes onto the motherboard. So at first here I was thinking, why don't I group all these cables together? But then I realized, hey, what if the one of the cables that was in that whole bunch there, one of them could have just gone straight across behind the blue bar. So after this, you'll see I actually end up taking off that Velcro cable tie, because the main reason I did that was because I just wanted the cable to go straight behind the blue bar, and with this it was not going straight. It had to go down a little bit to fit into the big bunch, and then go into the behind the blue bar. So I realized that, you know, I probably shouldn't do this. And, you know, to let that cable out of the big jumble. And then I'm still thinking, how am I gonna get this to stay on the bottom of the bottom of the case? You'll see me letting out that cable from the big bunch in a second here. I was like, maybe I would be better off just kinda leaving that cable to go straight by itself instead of being in a big bunch where it doesn't just go straight. Which in the end is a better idea to do. So here I go, taking off the Velcro cable tie, letting that cable go free straight to behind the blue bar. So right now we've knocked down the 4-pin CPU power, the USB 3, the SATA cable. We're almost done with the 4-pin graphics card power. So we're doing really good right now. And whenever you can, you should also ask people like around you, you know, like family members and such, for feedback. How should I route this? How should I route that? And my dad actually gave me a really good tip here for how to get the graphics card cable to stay at the bottom of the case, which you will see in a little bit. Right here, my dad kind of examines, you know, what do you think we should do? And we end up getting a Velcro cable tie, and we just tie it into that little hole at the bottom of the case, which ended up being like a really good idea in the end, because it just makes it look so much cleaner. Without that, there pretty much would have been no other way to like put the cable at the bottom of the case and make it stay there. So here you'll just see me tying that to the bottom. And here's a quick tip: whenever you have all these you know, all these Velcro cable ties, and you have like a bunch of slack, right? Because you've tied it, and then there's like a bunch of the cable tie left that, you know, it could get caught in fans. Who knows what could happen with it? Just cut that off. Get as like little as you need of the cable tie. So my dad's just making sure everything looks good here, tightening it up. And in the end, we are good to go. I end up grabbing the scissors there to cut that cable, cut the cable tie, the Velcro cable tie, the very end of it, because it's just so much left. And while it couldn't get caught in anything, like for that specific cable tie, if you put one somewhere else, like close to a fan, and we're tying some cables together, it could definitely get into the fan and get caught in there, which would not be good for any of the wire or the components. So we find a nice way to route the 24-pin power. We don't have too much of an option here, so we just had to run it right under the graphics card. Well, it doesn't look the cleanest, it was the best that we could do in the case that we were working in. It's a really nice looking case, but you gotta make sure your cable management, like you gotta kind of plan your cable management before you even do anything. And that's why I had to make this video. So I'm just looking for the rest of the cables that I have to do. We got most of them knocked out, as you can see. We got the CPU power, the 24-pin, the SATA, the USB 3, the graphics card power, the front panel headers, the front case headers for the things like the power button, USB ports. I'm just making sure there's no cables caught in the fans by spinning them. And now we're just going to clean the case, so grab a wet paper towel or tissue and wipe the case all around. Be sure not to touch any components, like especially the boards, like the motherboards, any circuitry. Don't want to be messing with that. I normally just don't really get close to that stuff. And if you have an condensed air compressor, that is totally an option here. You can even do that before you do all the cable management, but I would normally do that after. So you can do all the cleaning all at once. So just try to get as many parts of the case as you can. You can see here I'm trying to get those SSD trays, the blue bar, making sure it's nice and clean. The bottom area where the hard drive and power supply is stored. And yeah. So just continue cleaning with a wet paper towel all around the system here. So we're gonna get to the top and you can see it's all dusty up here. Look at all that dust. Just start wiping it down and you can already see the difference in color. Quick tip is to make sure that you do not run your computer with, if you say clean a filter and it's wet, do not run your PC because that water could get into the parts and damage them. So make sure you dry all wet things in your build, such as filters and such, before you put them in the build. And you'll see us cleaning a filter a little later in the video. Continue cleaning, try to get all the parts, all the dusty parts as good as you can, because we want our PCs to be looking spotless here. So after that, after the wet paper towel phase, I like to call it, you're going to want to get your dry tissue or paper towel. In this case, I just used a tissue because we had it on hand. And start drying the PC. So when you're using a tissue, a tip is when you're, using one side of the tissue, but when you, after a while, that side is going to get wet from all the water that you're getting off. So you're going to want to switch sides and use a different part of the tissue occasionally. So you can see there I got a little bit of the water part onto that area. Make sure you don't get any like liquid water into those ports. We're just cleaning the top and around it with a dry paper towel now, a dry tissue. So another part that you're going to want to take off here is the front kind of panel, I want to call it, a front panel. So this panel is what holds the front filters in most cases. And as we pop that off, you could see all the dust just coming right off and filling the air. All that dust just filling the air. So what we aim to get from that is that we now have access to the filter, which, as you can see, has a bunch of dust on it. So we take that off, and you're just going to want to run to the bathroom and rinse that thing off. So rinse it off, get all that dust off, and then you're just going to want to get a paper towel or a tissue and dry it really well. You do not want any water or liquid circulating in your system, because that could be hazardous to components, which leads to, of course, death of components. So your motherboard or graphics card might die if they're exposed to water, which obviously you don't want happening. That's why you need to make sure everything in your build is dry. And then water cooling, of course, is a different story, because there's no like exposed liquids. So in this case, there's like a little clip at the bottom that you gotta fit the filter in, just like that, and it's a magnet at the top, so it clicks right in. That is that. And yeah, as you can see, the filter looks much cleaner now than with when it had all the dust and everything. Which definitely wasn't good for the computer. That's why every 3 months or so, I would say, is you're gonna wanna at least dust out your computer. So here in the end, we're just putting on the side panel. And be sure you don't just put on the side panel, like slide it in, but you actually screw in the 2 screws with your Phillips head screwdriver. It's very important, or else the side panel will just collapse off. Obviously, different cases have different side panels types. So like some are magnetic and they just it's kind of like a door opening, and they're all tempered glass. And other cases like mine require screws to be put into place. So for this last part here, we are putting the case onto its front so that we can see the front. And what we are going to do now is just put on that blue front panel that we kind of took off to get access to the filter area that we washed. And dried. So in my case, I had to align the NZXT logo at the bottom of the front panel to the bottom of the case. And do not be afraid to use force here. Just get all 4 corners. You'll see me in the video here. You'll see me like slamming it. So bam, 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 bam in all 4 corners, and it's nice tightly on. So on to the setup. Make sure you plug everything in, and moment of truth. Will it turn on? There you go. If you did everything correctly, followed the tutorial, plugged all of your cables in, your PC will fire up. Make sure you plug the power in, make sure you have the power switch on, and you'll see all of your components light up. You can see me pointing to the fans that are spinning, the RAM that is lighting up. These are all signs that your computer is posted. And just look for output on your display. So this is our end product. product, our PC, looking much cleaner in both aesthetics and just cleanliness. It's no longer dusty. It just looks very, very clean. Thank you guys for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time.